Conservative commentator and the editor at Breitbart, Ben Shapiro, wrote a piece on Philip Seymour Hoffman's death, and who does he blame? Liberals. No surprise. He says, quote, Philip Seymour Hoffman was one of the most talented actors of his generation, an actor whose magnetism on screen sprang from intelligence and fervor rather than appearance. But his self-inflicted death is yet another hallmark of the broken leftist culture that dominates Hollywood. Libertarianism becomes libertinism without a cultural force pushing back against the penchant for sin. Hollywood has no such cultural force. In fact, the Hollywood demand is for more self-abasement, less spirituality, less principle, less standards. No one knows what sort of demons plagued Seymour Hoffman, but without a sound moral structure around those in Hollywood who have every financial and talent advantage, the path to destruction is far too easy. So the point he's making is, look, man, if you have people, the best way to make people live productive lives and live happy, healthy lives is to give them some sort of religious and moral structure where you work in absolutes and you say, okay, this is right and this is wrong and that's from God, so that's that. Now, there's multiple problems with that. I mean, number one, that doesn't mean that God or religion is true. In fact, there's no evidence that any God or any religion is true. So therefore, you're living your life based on a structure that is fundamentally a lie, that there's no evidence for, there's no proof for. So you're wasting your time, essentially. You're not actually looking for answers. You're just saying, we're just going to use this as our framework and we'll work off that. But that's not a very reflective life. That's not an intelligent way of viewing the world. So that's the first problem. But also, his insinuation is that, like, religious people never struggle with addiction and vices. So just one example, how about the great evangelist Ted Haggard? I mean, here's a guy who's incredibly religious. You know, the right-wingers loved him. He was a preacher. He never had sex with gay hookers and did drugs with them, right? Oh, wait, what? He did? So there goes your theory right there. There's plenty of people who have that religious slash so-called moral structure that end up having the same issues. But maybe I'm not being fair because you could say, well, Kyle, that's anecdotal. Well, I mean, if you look at the religious states in the Midwest, so they have the highest levels of religiosity. They're also the highest levels of republicanism. They're the deepest red states. They also have an epidemic of crystal meth use. They also have higher levels of divorce and other things that these guys would view as social ills. So clearly, that's not the answer. The answer isn't just to be religious or have some sort of, let me do my moralizing and then everything will be okay. That's not an actual answer. Empirically, that doesn't work. But even more importantly than that, and we touched on this yesterday, I noticed that my partners over at the Young Turks talked about it as well. Legal drugs could have saved Philip Seymour Hoffman. Now, I know that sounds counterintuitive, but you have to understand how these things work. So think about during Prohibition in the United States when alcohol was illegal. What happened? Well, people had to make the alcohol in their bathtubs, and they had to use these questionable, weary substances to cut it with. So as a result of that, sometimes there were bad batches of alcohol. So you could have 1/2 glass of vodka and you're dead. Okay? The reason why that happened is because there weren't regulations. It wasn't made in a factory. It wasn't made by legitimate businesses. It was made by people in the mafia, in their bathtubs. And sometimes there are bad batches. So because it was illegal, it wasn't regulated, it wasn't safe, and people died when they shouldn't have, okay? That can't happen now. You can still overdose and drink too much alcohol and get alcohol poisoning and die, but you can't die from just a bad batch, okay? Same thing with heroin. If heroin was legal and regulated, guess what? This guy would be okay. Philip Seymour Hoffman would be okay, because there were also articles that broke the same day that he died talking about how there was heroin that was laced with a drug that's 100 times more powerful than morphine. Wow. So morphine is what they give you when you go into the hospital and your fucking leg's hanging off from a car accident or something. So it's powerful. And of course, morphine and all opiates suppress your respiratory system, so you breathe slower. Okay? And if you take a drug that's 100 times more powerful than morphine and you inject the same amount that you would if it was regular heroin or regular morphine, that's a lethal dose. That's a fatal dose. And because these things aren't regulated, because you don't know what's in them, that's the problem. That's why he passed away. His stuff was tainted. So, in every way, shape, and form here, Ben Shapiro is dead wrong and he missed the point.